Ken promised us a laser analogy and that everything would start making sense. My bet is that he will just talk about lasers for a bit, fuck it up, and then not link it back to the thing that he's trying to explain with his analogy. So let's have a look.
If we actually go on to a laser analogy, this incommensurability is spatially coherent like a laser, and I'm going to use this laser analogy to point out the similarities of incommensurability and point nonspecific and also point source. Spatially coherent light has another name. It's also referred to as sphere waves or plane waves, or even simpler, pinhole light or point source light. Coherent light is simple. It's light which comes from a very small light source. Light from a single source is always coherent, since the incoherence requires at least two different Cartesian sources. This is also the reason why LED light is so damaging to the eyes, is because all LEDs are essentially point sources of light. They are very damaging to human eyes.
Now, I am watching this video on a screen made up of LEDs, and trust me, it's not the LEDs which are damaging here, it is actually the nonsense that comes out of the speakers by virtue of you talking. Okay, I'll grant you that some really bright LEDs can damage the eyes, but we are talking about really intense exposures here. It has nothing to do with the fact that they are point sources and more to do with these lights just being really fucking bright. Also, only really small or really far away LEDs are treated as point sources. Now, as a general bit of advice, if it is uncomfortable to look at a light source, then maybe you shouldn't. You should definitely also not do this.
Now, I also told you about the advanced technique of sun gazing with urine in your eyes.
What the actual fuck is wrong with you? Why are you putting piss in your eyes? Why are you drinking your piss? Why are you looking at the sun with piss in your eyes? These are questions that shouldn't need to be asked, let alone have a good fucking answer. Jesus.
Thanks, barman.
And since incoherence requires two sources by definition, the so-called lines of force seen in a magnet are merely the constructive and destructive interference patterns of the polarity, i.e. the two sources of the centrifugal divergence and centripetal convergence of the magnetism against the dielectric. It can't even exist any other way. This is the very definition of the ancient Greek term anarche, translated as necessity, but what it actually means is it can't exist any other way.
Yeah, check my previous video for the correct translation of that word, or incorrect translation. I don't know. Maybe some classic scholars will have come across my channel and corrected me, but all I have to say to them is, get a real job. No, I joke, but no, really. Get a real job. Classics.
Actually looking at geomagnetic precession here, which, by the way, the precession rate in average is 42.5 megahertz.
42.5 megahertz. Where did you get that number from? And how is it relevant? What processes at an average of 42.5 megahertz? Now, here is the equation for the frequency of gyromagnetic precession again. And as you can see, there are two factors, the applied magnetic field and the gyromagnetic ratio of whatever particle is in that field. Now, a proton will precess at 42.5 megahertz in a 1 Tesla field, but you could also say that it precesses at 267 million radians per second, but that's just one type of particle in a very specific conditions using a very specific system of units. It doesn't precess at an average of 42.5 megahertz. Not at all.
We're looking at the hyperboloid. Now this is incorrect. And at the top we'd actually have a human line. And of course to make a line, in the case of a human line, we actually have to have an XY vector to actually hone in on a point, and then from that we draw a line. To make a line we have to start from a point, and then we actually have to start with a line, then to make a point, and from that point make a line. And that's a human line. Of course underneath that we'd actually have Mother Nature's line, which starts in a point in counter space. But of course it can't be like this, and this is a straight line. There are no straight lines in nature. What? That doesn't make any damn sense, you fat, bald, tattooed asshole.
Don't worry, mate. I think the next bit is probably not going to make any sense either.
This, of course, is still incorrect, but take a look at this. Since this is two-dimensional, at the bottom here we'd actually have Mother Nature's line. A magnet is like a laser in that it is a field multiplicative phenomena wherein which point source emission is not additive but multiplicative in nature, or conventionally is meant power. A pre-magnet is quantitatively the same object with nearly infinite mutually destructive sources at the level of the atoms and the molecules themselves.
Okay, thinking about this, I think that there may be a kernel of truth here, and that he's referring to disorder inside the material. I may be overthinking it, but I will give him the benefit of the doubt. In paramagnetic materials, all the moments are orientated in random directions. The small field due to each particle is being cancelled out by the ones next to it, and there is no net magnetization. Now, in ferromagnetic materials, there is ordering. Adjacent spins like to align for, well, reasons that we will not go into here, and a slightly more detailed description is in a prior video on this. However, the end result is that there are regions called magnetic domains, and inside these domains all the spins are aligned in a given direction. The overall direction of the different domains is arranged so the field of each domain is cancelled out by the others. But I am repeating myself again. I've explained this several times.
Upon becoming a magnet, there is point source incommensurability within the conjugate fields of the magnet, which then creates the ab extra field phenomena around a magnet, which people think incorrectly is being emitted by the magnet. Rather, however, this ab extra field is, of course, the medium itself, i.e. the ether.
Now, this is a shame because you said something which made sense. You said it in a very convoluted and ridiculous way, but it made a tiny bit of sense if I'm perhaps overthinking it. But then you instantly follow it up with unadulterated bullshit.
In-phase emission causes the amplification of light in the case of the laser. It doesn't cause coherence of light in the laser. Because atoms emit the phase with incoming light, they will amplify the light, but they also amplify the incoherence additionally so as well.
I'm not sure you know the basics of how lasers work. Okay, I'll make it real simple. Laser stands for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. Now, the stimulated emission bit is important there. Inside a laser, there's a medium that is being put in an excited state. That is to say that there are lots of electrons which are bumped from their ground state to a higher energy state. When a photon of the right energy comes in and interacts with the excited electron, the electron actually moves back down to its ground state, but the energy of the incident photon has to be equal to the difference between the two electron energy states. And this is stimulated emission because as the electron moves back to the ground state, it has to release a photon because, well, the conservation of energy and stuff. But this photon has the exact same frequency and phase as the incident photon. So you have one photon coming in and two coming out. Because the emitted photon has the exact same energy and phase as the incident photon, the emitted light is in phase and monochromatic, therefore both spatially and temporally coherent. But it is funny how Ken brings up lasers in a series where he seems to dispute quantum mechanics, because it was Einstein who predicted stimulated emission using quantum mechanics.
They do not make it coherent. The coherence of a laser light has another source. The two characteristics of laser light is it is monochromatic, meaning a very pure frequency. This is also called temporal coherence. Laser light also has a point source character of sphere waves or plane waves, also referred to as spatial coherence.
So let's wrap our heads around this. Here he is saying that lasers are both spatially and temporally coherent, which is correct. But how does this gel with what he said before?
In the laser, because atoms emit the phase with incoming light, they will amplify the light, but they also amplify the incoherence additionally so as well.
But all that notwithstanding, I still fail to see how this is related to magnetism, and that was the most pointless section I've seen so far.
Starlight, for example, has coherence in millions of kilometers, and starlight is far more coherent than any human-made laser. The most distant stars are just like ideal point sources. Interestingly enough, of course, our closest star, Betelgeuse, astronomer A.A. Michelson discovered that Betelgeuse is far, far less coherent than other stars. That's because it's so close to us.
Okay, wow, we're getting somewhere. That last bit actually made some sense, and I believe it is correct.
Dennis Gabber invented holography before lasers existed. To create his pseudo-lasers, he took light from an ordinary mercury arc lamp and passed it through a pinhole. Pinhole aperture. Mercury's emissions line made it nearly monochromatic, and the pinhole gave it spatially coherence.
Do you know why emission lines are monochromatic? And do you know what branch of physics describes this? No? Well, I'll give you a hint. It begins with a Q and it ends in quantum mechanics.
Spatial coherence. So we actually have monochromatic light pass through a pinhole to make it spatially coherent, and then we pass it through a wavelength filter, And this is how we were actually able to create holograms before lasers even existed. Specifically, Dennis Gabber did. I'm using this laser analogy to draw the parallels and give a representational analogy to the nature of the magnet when we're talking about spatial coherence here.
Okay, I am really interested to see how you are going to bring this together.
People don't understand what actually defines a magnet. We'll, of course, define magnetism in section 6. In short, I mean, to make up a lecture, I mean, to fully describe it, I mean, it would take many, many hours, and of course requires a book, which unfortunately I'm burdened with producing.
Which you can buy for £7.37 at all disreputable bookstores, so Amazon. Don't worry, I doubt that he will describe or define anything in that book. Now, I have got a copy by virtue of Ken making his books available for free as well, but he still sells it, so the joke is valid. I thought that I would query the PDF file for the following terms, which are kind of important in magnetism, and see how much they would come up. So the word moment appears 0 times in the book. Spin appears 63 times. Induction appears 125 times. Now, domain wall, 5. Transverse domain wall, or just transverse wall, 0. Vortex wall, 0. Block point, 0. Block wall, 18, of which 0 have been used correctly. Nail, 0. Demagnetization, also 0. Magnetostatic, 0. Exchange, 0. Magnetocrystalline, 0. Anisotropy, 0. Skyrmion, 0. Soliton, 0. Electron, 34 times. A photon, only 4 times. And Lorentz, 0. Now, quite frankly, I'm quite surprised by how often some of these terms popped up, but I'm a hack and I didn't actually really check whether they were used in the right context, apart from block wall, as they are key objects in my research.
There we go. So what's the difference? We got a light bulb here on the left and a laser on the right. What's the difference between a 5-watt light bulb, which is useless for anything? Nobody makes... I think they do make 5-watt light bulbs for like little oddball purposes, but I mean a 5-watt laser light bulb you can't even read by. 5-watt laser, however, is dangerous, powerful, it'll blind you, and it'll burn a hole in your ass. What's the difference? Well, coherence. No, you're partially correct, but what makes the difference is one is point source, the other one is not.
No, the difference comes from the fact that the light bulb emits that light in all directions, whereas the laser concentrates all that power into one small area. Let's take a 5-watt light bulb, and we can even treat it as a point source to really demonstrate this point. At a distance r from the source, the intensity is given by the expression of the power divided by 4 pi the distance squared. So at a distance of 1 meter, the intensity of a 5-watt light bulb is 0.398 watt per square meter. Take a 5-watt laser with a beam diameter of, say, 1 millimeter, and we'll ignore divergence for now. In the case of the laser, all of that 5 watts is deposited over a disk with that 1 millimeter radius, and this gives you an intensity of 1.5 million watts per square meter. That's where the difference comes from.
A lot of things that people also don't understand about lasers. Let me read this final paragraph here. That most types of lasers actually emit spreading non-parallel light. Lasers and CD players and laser pointers are semiconductor diode lasers. They create cone-shaped light beams, and if parallel beam is desired, which everybody thinks a laser is just this parallel beam or lightsaber of light, and that's not how lasers actually work. But if the parallel beam is desired, they require a focusing lens. The same is true for all lasers, in the case of like inexpensive laser pointers, and even in an old glass tube helium neon lasers like this, which I used to have. If you actually take apart an old laser pointer, you'll find the plastic lens in front of the diode inside. Like the classroom helium neon lasers also create a spreading light beam. The laser tube within a typical classroom laser contains at least one curved mirror called a confocal arrangement, and it creates light in the form of a spreading cone. It's a little known fact that manufacturers of classroom lasers traditionally place a convex lens on the end of their laser tubes in order to shape the spreading light into a parallel beam. While it is true that a narrow beam is convenient, it's the case that most people, have the stereotype that all lasers produce these thin, narrow beams of light, and that's not the case. These lasers actually have confocal arrangements, and they have actually focusing lenses on them. Lasers do not create this narrow beam of light as everybody conventionally conceives it to be the case.
Again, this is completely pointless. Now, it is correct, but pointless. How's about you just
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it.
Oh, I am enjoying this scene.
Get on with it.
This is another example of point source light, and that's the case of magnetism as well, which is why I was discussing lasers, is that we're actually talking about point source emission. We actually have this incommensurability, this point non-specific point source incommensurability of the field, this conjugate magnetodielectric field of the magnet itself, but there's nothing located there. It is the pressure mediation necessitated of the energy emission and the magnetodielectric geometry of the torus and the hyperboloid mediating out their own pressures. Everything in nature, of course, is pressure mediation.
Okay, there's something that I really want to insert in this video, and this is probably the best place for it. Ken says that everything in nature is pressure mediation, whatever the fuck that means. Ken claims to be one of the only people to truly understand the universe. Now, I don't want anyone thinking that I am shitting on Nikola Tesla. I have huge admiration for the man. I actually want to bring up a quote by Tesla, which makes me smile every time. And this quote is that if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Firstly, I find this quote really funny because the electric universe proponents love Tesla and this quote, but they rail against quantum mechanics, even though quantum mechanics does exactly that. Tesla was absolutely right with this, and I don't think he fully understood exactly how right he was with this. A more concise statement would actually just be, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, as this includes the frequency and vibration bit as well. The point here is that if you want to understand the general trends of any physical process anywhere in the universe, you just need to consider one simple statement. The universe is lazy. All objects want to be in the lowest accessible energy state. And that is physics in a nutshell. I am going to cut this here and wrap up. For the rest of the video, he talks a bit more nonsense about stuff that has nothing to do with the subject of this lecture. This part was actually quite surprising to me. He demonstrated some level of understanding of lasers. Okay, his understanding is pretty crude and a lot of it was still incorrect, but he seems to have a better understanding of lasers than he has of magnetism. Now, this guy made a 22-minute video where he sets out to define polarity and incommensurability. He does neither. Instead, he talks about lasers for a disproportionate amount of time, and I think I vaguely understand where he was going though. I think that he was trying to liken the spatial coherence of a laser to long-range ordering in a magnet, where he fucks it up is that he refers to the long-range ordering in a magnet as coherence. Problem is that spatial coherence refers to phase relationships of waves, and it is a term that is used in magnetism, but that's when we're referring to spin waves and we're not opening that can of worms. The long-range ordering in a magnet is something a little bit different, and it refers to the alignment of the spins inside of a magnet, as I have discussed several times already in this video and in this series, and basically most other videos I've done regarding magnets. Once again, this part of his lecture followed a similar theme as the others. He claims to set out to explain something, and he absolutely doesn't. Instead, he moves around different topics and even pulls out an analogy, but once again, he doesn't really link that analogy to the thing that he is explaining. I could do the same, and I am going to explain magnetism using broccoli. So if you look at broccoli, you see that it has a stem and this branches off. Each branch then branches off further and it's almost fractal-like. But if you take a Romanesque broccoli, you see similar structures, and then there's this pleasing fractal spiral pattern which follows the golden ratio. And that's magnetism, just deal with it. Now it seems silly, but that is basically Ken's approach. So that was it for the 5th part of Ken Wheeler's lecture on magnetism, and from peeking ahead I can see that he actually intends to explain all of magnetism in the next section. So I look forward to what wisdom he shares with us next time, but until then I would like to take a moment to thank my patrons, who are Thomas J. Miller, Kate Hebneter, Walter Bislin, Johnny Ragadoo, Adalbert Red, Alexander Nick, MC Toon, Mike Harris, Paul Bates, Paul Schnus, Radek Stajny, Simon Blacklock Hughes, Stan Zaystef, Stringer News Wonder, Ranku, Kai Brooking, Mark Edwards, Michelle Randall, Richmond Clemens, Ugly German Truth, and Lucas Schmidt. If you want to support me financially, then that would be greatly appreciated, as it will help me maintain this channel and it will support me with my beer and snacks whilst I'm writing up my thesis on magnetism. But that was it from me. Thank you for watching, and until next time.